Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something literally monumental. We're going to look under the hood at the final, thrilling stages of the world's largest democratic process, the Indian elections. There is just an absolute mountain of machinery working behind the scenes to make this massive exercise happen, and we are going to break the whole shebang down step by step.
Okay, let's just dive right into this. It's pretty easy to look at a country and say, well, they hold elections, so they must be a democracy, right? But as our sources point out, even non-democratic countries hold some kind of elections. So we really need to put on our critical lenses here. We have to ask, what actually makes an election democratic? Well, it requires a true choice, equal value for literally every single vote, and a system that's fundamentally free and fair. So let's see how the mechanics of the Indian system actually measure up to that standard.
To do that, we're going to follow a clear roadmap today. First, we'll look at the election campaign, then polling and counting, move on to the Independent Election Commission, and finally, look at challenges to democracy.
All right, part one, the election campaign, mobilizing the masses.
Now, for an official 2-week period, right between the announcement of the final list of candidates and the actual date of polling, the campaign trail just completely erupts. And this brilliantly illustrates the vibe. Politicians arriving carrying these massive, heavy bags of promises directly to the voters. During this frantic window, candidates are constantly contacting voters, holding these massive rallies and making big, sweeping commitments to mobilize their base. It is a highly competitive, incredibly loud environment where parties are just putting their visions for the future out there to attract the public's vote.
But as you might guess, this competition can't just be a total free-for-all. There's a vital difference between what candidates want to do to win versus what they're actually allowed to do. So to ensure a fair competition and a true level playing field, campaigners are bound by strict election laws and this absolutely crucial set of rules known as the Model Code of Conduct. Let's actually look at what that Code of Conduct restricts, because these are the core safeguards for democracy. First off, candidates absolutely cannot bribe or threaten voters, obviously, and they cannot appeal to them in the name of caste or religion. Plus, they're strictly prohibited from using government vehicles, aircraft, or officials for campaigning propaganda. Think about what that means. Even a super powerful sitting minister suddenly loses their government perks for campaigning. Once elections are announced, they can't lay foundation stones for new projects or make big policy promises that might unfairly sway voters. It really changes the dynamic.
So the crucial point here is that the system actively attempts to stop excessive money power from just completely taking over the process. Under the law, a candidate cannot spend more than 25 lakh rupees in a constituency for a Lok Sabha election or 10 lakh in an assembly election. And wow, the stakes here are incredibly high. If they exceed these strict spending limits, their election can actually be rejected by the courts. And get this, that applies even after they've already won and been declared the victor. Crazy, right?
Okay, moving on to part two, polling and counting. It's the voters' turn.
Now, when a person walks into, say, a local school or a government office that's serving as a polling booth, 3 pretty simple things happen. Step 1, election officials verify her identity against the voters list. Step 2, they put an indelible ink mark on her finger so she can't vote twice. And step 3, she goes into the booth and casts her vote. Historically, this was on a ballot paper, but now it's done using an electronic voting machine, or EVM. Now just take a second and imagine scaling this remarkably simple 3-step procedure to nearly 1 billion eligible voters across the entire country. The logistics are just mind-boggling.
But you might be wondering, how do we know someone isn't tampering with the whole process? Well, the answer lies in a really vital, on-the-ground safeguard. Agents representing each of the candidates are legally allowed to sit right inside the polling booths on Election Day. They physically watch the process to make sure voting is fair. And actually, their job doesn't end there. Days later, when the sealed EVMs are finally open for counting in a highly secure center, those exact same candidate agents are present to verify that the counting is done properly and transparently.
Which brings us to part 3, the Election Commission, the independent umpire.
So the Election Commission, or EC, is pretty much the backbone of the Indian electoral system. It is an incredibly independent and powerful body. And what's truly fascinating here is that the EC enjoys the exact same kind of independence that the judiciary enjoys. Our sources actually note that very, very few election commissions anywhere in the entire world possess this kind of wide-ranging autonomy to just conduct and control elections without outside interference.
Let's take a look at their sweeping powers, because the EC doesn't just watch, it acts.
It implements that model code of conduct we talked about earlier and actively punishes violators. If it finds that polling in a certain booth, or, hey, even an entire constituency was unfair, it can just order a repoll. But here is perhaps its most extraordinary power, in my opinion. During election time, government officers assigned to election duty work exclusively under the control of the EC, not the ruling government. The EC can literally even reprimand the government and administration for lapses. Talk about a level playing field, right?
Let's move to Part 4 and see how this builds. Challenges to free and fair elections.
Now, while the machinery is undeniably impressive, it operates in a very complex reality. Voters routinely demand actual delivery on those earlier promises we mentioned, literally holding politicians' feet to the fire. And, despite reports of unfair practices here and there, the overall verdict of a general election in India still largely manages to reflect popular preference. Rulers routinely lose elections if they don't perform. This ability for the common citizen to hold their leaders accountable, that is the absolute hallmark of Indian democracy.
And the hard data actually backs this up. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is when asked, do you think your vote makes a difference? A massive 67% of respondents said yes, it has an effect. Only 15% felt it had no effect. To put that into perspective, this demonstrates a massive, enduring popular faith among citizens that their participation in the electoral process fundamentally shapes the way things are run in their country.
But we have to look past the shiny surface for a minute and ask a deeper, tougher question. Is the election really a level playing field? While the elections are largely free and fair on a macro level, when we zoom in and look closer at individual constituencies, we definitely see persistent flaws and inequalities that challenge the very spirit of democratic fairness.
The realities outlined in our sources are frankly complex and compounding. It starts with excessive money power. Wealthy candidates and large parties just hold a significant, immediate advantage right out of the gate. Then you couple that with a deep trend of dynastic dominance where certain families control political parties and routinely distribute election tickets straight to their relatives. For the ordinary citizen, this often culminates in a frustrating lack of real policy choice, since major parties can operate quite similarly in practice. So ultimately, independent candidates or folks from smaller parties suffer massive systemic disadvantages when they're trying to break through and compete against these established political giants.
So, with the massive role of money, the dominance of political dynasties, and all these structural hurdles in place, can an ordinary citizen realistically hope to win elections today? It's a huge question, and one that really highlights the limitations of the current system and underscores the ongoing need for electoral reforms by citizens and social activists. Well, thank you so much for joining me to explore the mechanics and the persistent challenges of this totally fascinating democratic process. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will catch you in the next explainer.